Well, I just want to say on behalf of everyone in here, bless you. Whoever that was, I heard that backstage, and yes, hope you're doing okay this morning. Hey, anyways, my name is Jeremy. I'm the content director here at Northpoint, and if you were here last week, you would have actually heard Jordan Geist, our associate pastor, refer to me by a different name, and that is the name of the character that I choose whenever I see this screen right here. This is Super Smash Bros, and my character of choice is Marth. And I actually got a text from somebody saying, hey, Marth, last week after Jordan shared that, which is pretty awesome. But I'm just curious, by a quick show of hands in here, raise your hand if you played this game growing up or at some point. Yeah, okay, more people in this service than last. I loved this game, and it was a part of my childhood, and then it popped up again in college, as often many things do. But in college, in our sophomore year, we were in this apartment in West Campus, downtown UT, and we played this game all the time. In fact, we had 6 guys in this apartment. We had 3 rooms, so 2 guys per room, and we basically teamed up. So our roommate was our teammate, and so we would just play each other. And what Jordan didn't say last week was that we had this really nice painting that someone brought into our apartment. And then right underneath it, we scotch taped this printer piece of paper on the wall underneath this painting with a pencil hanging from it in complete college guy fashion. And we just made tick marks for the amount of wins that we got throughout the entire year. And at the end of the year, I will say Jordan and I did have the most tick marks, which means we were the winners. One of my proudest accomplishments in life, unfortunately. But we spent an unhealthy amount of time playing that game, but it was a blast. But last week we kicked off this series kind of with this video game theme called Choose Your Character. The name of the series is called Choose Your Character. And what we talked about last week is when it comes to goals and New Year's resolutions and all these kind of things that we set every year, a lot of them are kind of outcome-based, let's change external things in our life. But we asked the question, what if this year instead we actually looked internal? And we decided to look at who we are becoming, what our character is like. And the reason we would do that is because character influences so much in our life and so much in our stories. In fact, pastor and writer Andy Stanley describes the importance of character like this. He says that your character is who you truly are. It will impact how much you accomplish in this life. It will determine whether or not you are worth knowing. It will make or break every one of your relationships. It reaches into every single facet of your life. Your character is not stagnant, but is either developing or deteriorating. To summarize in one sentence, character is really, really important and impactful to all the other areas of our life. But this year, if we are to grow in our character, we first must need to know what it is. We need to define what is character. And Jordan did that last week in part 1, which is kind of our working definition throughout this series, and he defined it like this. Character is the resolve to do what is right according to what God says, regardless of the cost. That there's a version of right given to us by God, and that's a big concept, which is why you got to go back and listen to part 1. But there's a version of right given to us by God, and character is the willingness to do it, knowing there might be a cost, but if there is, it is worth it in the long run to grow in character. So now that we know what it is, now we can begin to take steps in the direction of developing character in our life. But here's the dilemma, is that when we begin to take steps in the direction of growing our character, we all bump into something. We hit a roadblock. Whether you're a Jesus follower or not, this is universal to everybody. We all bump into something that stagnates our character and keeps us from growing. This thing has the potential to do damage to your career, to your relationships, to your marriage, to your relationship with your kids, to every aspect of your life, all of your hopes and dreams and ambitions. It has the potential to not just do damage, but actually destroy those things if we're not careful. And this thing is so easy to see in other people, but incredibly difficult to see in the mirror. You might be wondering, what is this thing that gets in the way of character? C.S. Lewis brilliantly describes it far better than I can. He says that the vice I am talking of is pride or self-conceit. The essential vice, the utmost evil, is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that. Think of all other character defects are mere flea bites in comparison. pride leads to every other vice. Pride is like the gateway drug to character defects. Pride is what opens us up to no longer see the path that we are on, so we potentially do damage to our life and the lives of those around us. There are two different types of pride. There's the good kind of pride. These are like prideful moments when we get married or we have children or we accomplish something. And these are the encouraging, good moments of pride in our life that we should feel proud. That's not the pride we're talking about today. What we're talking about is this nasty kind of lurks beneath the surface of our life, manifests itself in all sorts of different ways. We're talking about this kind of pride. And to define it very simply, it's really powerful, but it has a simple definition, and it's this. It is thinking too often or too highly of ourselves. Pride is when the thing that gets the most airtime in our minds and in our life are thoughts about us, our image, our lives, our stories, our bank accounts, the trajectory of our life, our kids. We are consumed with thoughts about us. We want to look good. We want to feel superior to those around us or the world around us. This is pride. It can show itself in a lot of different ways in our life. One of the things that so clearly illustrates pride, especially if you're a man in here, is the process of putting together IKEA furniture. I don't know about you guys, I throw away the instruction booklet, and then every single time I'm just like humbly going back to the trash, digging it out. It's the walk of shame of building IKEA furniture. But for me personally, pride showed itself in a really apparent way recently in which I thought too highly of myself. I was going backpacking with some friends. Some of them were staff members here at Northpoint, one of which is this man right here, Shane Norcross. And if you guys don't know Shane he leads our connection team, an incredible team of people who create all of the groups, environments, connection events, like the men's event that you just heard about earlier. And the thing you need to know about Shane and I's relationship is that we are absolutely horrible to each other. The way we communicate is really just through sarcasm. We just try to degrade the other person. It's really, really healthy. And not only this, I think we like each other. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that we do. But we share an office, and so it comes out all the time. But going into this trip, the thing that I wanted to do to attack Shane and tear him down mentally, emotionally, all those kind of things, is I wanted to comment on his age, because he's about 2 decades older than me and some of the younger guys in this group. And so we started throwing things at him like, oh man, like we're gonna have to carry your frail body down the mountain when your legs give out, right? And then I told him, hey, can I get your emergency contact list, like just in case something bad happens? Like these are the kind of things you're like, you're a horrible person. But these are the kind of things that Shane and I say to each other. He says terrible things too, I just wanna say. I promise. So going into this trip, we get there, and I realize I've made a big mistake because I forgot that Shane grew up in Canada, and he grew up doing this backpacking thing all the time. I had never done it before, which means that I underestimated what goes into your pack and how that kind of it impacts your hike. And this hike was a big one because there were 3,000 feet of elevation gain going up, and we had to carry our own water. And so I instantly realized, man, I don't know how to pack very well. And I want to show you guys, Shane took a picture of our packs, and I want to show you guys my pack relative to the other guys. See if you can find it. So if you don't know, I'm the hobbit with the beanbag in his backpack. So we get there, we start hiking, clearly I've made a mistake, I don't know how to pack. And I swear, I thought Shane was gonna be at the back of the pack, but I spent the next 2 days huffing and puffing, trying to keep up with this ridiculously cardio-fit, reincarnated Canadian mountain goat of a little man. It was horrible, and it was so humbling, to say the least. Perhaps you have a story like that in your own life where you've had to put your foot in your mouth, you've learned some humble kind of lessons, right? We could probably all share these kind of stories. I think pride shows itself in a lot of different ways in our life, but it also shows up in much more significant areas as well. And to put it very simply, the reason I believe pride gets in the way of our character is because pride keeps us from recognizing when we're wrong. And if we were to take our definition of character, if we don't ever think we're wrong, we won't have the knowledge, ability, or resolve to do what is right according to what God says, regardless of the cost. See, pride diminishes our capacity or our ability to admit, to acknowledge, to apologize, to say what needs to be said, to hear what needs to be heard, to ask for help, to ask for directions when we're lost. It keeps us from celebrating the success of other people. It keeps us arguing a point when we know we have no point anymore. Pride shows itself in even our insecurities and our fears and our anxieties because it causes us to be so insecure that we strive and we strive and we strive, trying to look good to the people around us. This is pride. It keeps you from seeing what is true about who you are and who you are becoming, which means pride paralyzes your character. And here's the real danger in this is it affects us for sure, but the real casualty when pride paralyzes our character is the people around us. It's our relationships. Because pride crowds others out. Pride causes you to point your finger and blame and say, it's you, it's not me. When we are so full of us, there is no room for anybody else in our life. And pride causes us pointing the finger over and over and over again, unable to take responsibility for our own actions. Maybe you have been on the other side of this, a parent or a friend or a coworker or a boss or someone, and they have pointed the finger at you, and the two words that would have made all the difference would be, I'm sorry, but they've never come. And so it leaves you feeling disconnected and hurt and lonely. The root of that is pride. And what happens in our life is maybe you've done this to your relationships or it's been done to you, but it can kill the relationship. Where now there was a relationship that was a part of your life a long time ago, but pride destroyed it. This is the power of pride in our relationships. Pride doesn't just crowd people out, but pride crowds God out as well. There's a psalm in the Old Testament, and it says, in the thoughts of the proud, there is no room for God. There's no room for God because pride is the pathway to living outside of God's design. One of my mentors in my life has told me this over and over again. He says, pride is the root of all sin. When it comes to sin, living outside of God's design, when you trace its core motivator all the way back to what started it, oftentimes we discover it's pride. It's us saying, God, I don't need you. God, I can figure it out on my own. God, I don't want to invite you into this part of my life. God, I'm smarter than that. I think a lot of people even intellectualize their way around God, when in reality, it's pride keeping them from truly exploring their faith. This is the power of pride. And you might be thinking, okay, Jeremy, it's great. It sounds really bad. But here's the part that really gets in the way of character is, again, pride is nearly impossible to see in the mirror. It is so difficult for us to see because it requires us to admit that we're wrong. And that is just really, really hard to do. And so often we think of pride as like the rambunctious celebrities who kind of wear pride on their sleeves. But pride often manifests itself in our deepest insecurities and fear and anxieties. Psychology today says this about pride. Pride is often driven by poor self-worth and shame. We feel so badly about ourselves that we compensate by feeling superior. We look for others' flaws as a way to conceal our own. We relish criticizing others as a defense against recognizing our own shortcomings. Pride prevents us from acknowledging our human vulnerabilities. Pride hides itself in our insecurities. Maybe there was some point in our life where someone was supposed to ascribe self-worth to us, but they did the opposite. And so we're walking around in our lives looking for self-worth, or maybe nobody showed us what it means to have self-worth in the first place. And so we strive and we strive and we strive, trying to feel accepted, trying to be accepted on the outside. We are terrified on the inside of being found out. That also is pride. I think Jesus followers with this specific part of pride can sometimes be the worst because people start to follow Jesus, but then they see the rule book and they go, oh, I can do the rules. I can check the boxes off, all that kind of stuff, when it's not about that at all. But they do all these things. We check all these boxes. We try to make ourselves look so good little Christians, when in reality, we're just trying to hide from God and other people so afraid of being found out and being seen for who we truly are. See, Jesus, I think, was brilliant in the way that he saw people. When you read the New Testament and you read what he said and how he looked at people in the eyes and he saw underneath the person, the prideful person that was coming out, he saw their lives, their character. He sees our lives, our character. And he knows that pride paralyzes our character. And so he says these two powerful words to his disciples, and he says them to us today as well. He says these two powerful words, follow me. But he says them knowing what gets in the way of that. Because an invitation to follow Jesus is an invitation to unfollow pride. Eventually, if you follow Jesus, eventually you will discover that you have to unfollow the pride in your life. The great thing is Jesus does provide a better way. What if there was a way for us to be free from the pride, to be unshackled by the pride that paralyzes our character and damages so many aspects of our life, to be free from that so our character can flourish, our relationships can flourish, and we can leave the legacy ultimately that we want to leave with our lives and our stories. But we have to unfollow pride in order to do so. And when you go back to the Old Testament and you look in the book of Proverbs, it's written by a man who had his own dealings with pride, a man named King Solomon, and he was widely considered to be, even today, one of the wealthiest and wisest people of all time. And he had amazing influence. I mean, he was a king of the nation of Israel, and he writes at the end of his life, he writes these life principles down in the book of Proverbs, kind of just reflections on what he has seen throughout his amazing life. And we see pride pop up over and over and over again in the book of Proverbs. But there's one specific point where he gives us insight into what it means to unfollow it. Here's what Solomon writes. He says, pride goes before destruction and haughtiness before a fall. Pride goes before destruction. We know this, we see this already, that where there is destruction, where there is a character defect, we can trace it back to pride. But then the next sentence that he says, in this sentence lies a truth that gives us the insight into what it means to unfollow it. Here's what he writes. Very simple sentence. Better to live humbly with the poor than to share plunder with the proud. Better to live humbly with the poor than to share plunder with the proud. It's those two words right there in that sentence that give us the key of what it means to unfollow pride. It is replacing the pride in our life with a character of humility. Now, you know this already. You know pride and humility, these things are opposites, right? Like we see people who are humble. We value that kind of virtue in our culture today, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not. For me, where it falls short, even though we value humility, we know it's important, is it doesn't really get explained very often what it means to cultivate it and attain it in our lives. I hear amazing sentence like humility is not just thinking less of ourselves, but it's thinking of ourselves less, which I'm like, man, that's so good, that's great. But then I just think to myself, how do I do that? I'm like, okay, I'm gonna think less of myself right now, not thinking of myself, that's how I think. It's like, how do we actually attain humility? How do we cultivate this in our life? Andy Stanley's definition of humility is really helpful here. Here's how he defines it. Humility is viewing ourselves and our achievements through the lens of who God is. Seeing ourselves through the lens of who God is. Not just making ourselves small, but seeing the bigger picture, seeing ourselves relative to the size of everything else around us. The reason this is helpful, but also very challenging, is because when we look at our stories, our jobs, our lives, our successes, our families, our bank accounts, our net worth, and we look at these things in light of who God is, we come to terms with the pride-squashing reality of our finitude, that we are not as big as we thought we were. Richard Rohr, author and pastor, describes it like this moment of honesty that we have when we see things this way. He says, humility and honesty are the same thing. A humble person is simply a brutally honest person about the whole truth. You and I came along a few years ago, and we're going to be gone in a few years. And look at this. The only honest response to life is a humble one. I had a moment like this on that trip when I was backpacking with those guys. It was a humble moment, not as humiliating as the rest of the experience, but I had a goal there, and I'd been to this place a couple times before. It's one of the darkest places in North America, and I'd gone here in hopes of capturing a picture of the night sky. I took astronomy for a year in college and just was fascinated by it, and I love astrophotography, taking pictures of the night sky, long exposure photos. And so we go here, and I'm so excited because the second night, it's a clear sky, it's beautiful. The sun goes down, we're hanging out in this valley, and I set up my camera, put it on a tripod, set it to a 30-second exposure, take a photo, and then this is what pops up on the other side of the camera. And for me personally, when this kind of image pops up on the camera screen, my only response in that moment is humility. Because I see myself in light of the world around me. I see myself as a small, tiny speck in time and space because of this image. And not only this, but I mean, if we were to look at all the stars and start talking about numbers and statistics and how far away, millions of light years these are away, billions of galaxies, this is just one. I mean, the numbers just make our brains start to hurt. And when I see myself in this image, and I also know that I am made in the image of God, my response is one of humility. Because again, I am just a small speck in time and space. And not only this, but I think about the artist behind all of it. It's so hard to describe the indescribable, but I think Brendan Manning does a beautiful job in his book, Ruthless Trust. He says, no thought can contain him. No word can express him. He transcends all human concepts and considerations and expectations. He is the beyond in our midst, still beyond anything we can intellectualize or imagine. He cannot be comprehended by the rational, scientific, and finite mind. To unfollow pride is to see yourself through this lens. To unfollow pride is to see yourself through the lens of who God is. It's like we all have to have this kind of Galileo moment in our life. In the early 1600s, he was the first one to provide substantial evidence for the fact that the universe did not rotate around the earth. Up until this point, everybody had just thought, oh, the universe rotates around the earth. That was the natural observation. But he gave evidence for the fact that no, the earth rotates around the sun, and the sun is part of this much bigger picture in our universe. We are far smaller and insignificant than we thought. And it's like we all have to have, in order to cultivate humility, we have to have this kind of humble moment in our lives where we realize we are not at the center of the universe. We are not even at our center of the universe in our own lives. We have to have a moment where we realize that humility is the invitation to unfollow pride and follow character. That if we are to unfollow pride in our lives, pursue lives of character, we have to open up our hands and go, you know what? Maybe I don't know it all. Maybe there are areas of my life in which I am perhaps wrong. And that is so difficult. But maybe I am smaller than I thought I was. But when you do this, when you approach life in this kind of posture, it opens you up to experience a life of character. Because you realize the ways in which you are perhaps wrong, which frees you to do what is right according to what God says, regardless of the cost. And not only this, now your character is no longer detriment to your relationships, but your character becomes the fuel for your relationships. All of a sudden, you see yourself and the people around you through the lens of who God is. And when you do this, you go, oh my gosh, they are valuable. They are intrinsic. All the people in my life, they are important. They are more important than me. So I'm going to leverage me for them, not the value that they bring to me, but the value that I can bring to them in their lives. It's this moment of humility. I think there's no greater example of this than the person of Jesus Christ. To bring it full circle, the Apostle Paul writes in his letter to the Philippian church, he says this about humility and Jesus. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Well, what was Jesus' attitude when it comes to humility? He describes it. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. There is so much right here, but here's the point with this. Jesus proved that through his life, death, and resurrection that he was who he claimed to be, that he was divinity brought down to humanity. And he lived a perfect life, a sinless life, died a death that he did not deserve on a Roman cross, which historically speaking is one of the most humiliating ways to die. You hang naked, being mocked and spit on before people, and he hung naked as an innocent man, dying a death for you and for me. The greatest act of humility and love, and it substantiated the words that he spoke to crowds of people almost just days before his death. Matthew, the disciple Matthew, records this. Here's the words of Jesus. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. It's the great paradox of character and humility. Jesus washes his disciples' feet. He makes himself less because he's saying, hey, if you want to be great, you need to be less. If you want to be first, you need to be last. If you want to pursue a life of character and humility, you need to recognize that there is an infinite God that is greater than anything we can comprehend. And at the same time, there's this finite moment in history where he ascribes more worth and value to every single human being than we could possibly imagine, that you are loved, and through his grace, it lifts you up to pursue a life of character through humility. Again, humility, the invitation to unfollow pride and follow character. That's what I desire for all of us in here. That's what I want for your life. And so what I want to do is, as we're getting close to wrapping up, is I want to give you 2 practical steps that you can take today. Again, kind of distilling all of this down to 2 things that you can do today, whether you are a follower of Jesus or not, to pursue humility and pursue a life of character. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to say this in your life. I will not let pride be my guide. I will not let pride be my guide. In fact, I want you to say this with me, whether you're in the room or you're watching online, wherever you might be. I want you to say this with me, okay? 3, 2, 1. I will not let pride be my guide. When you say that, and you're hearing the voice of pride, and the voice of pride is telling you to follow and go along the path of pride in your relationships, and to tell the person around you, no, you're wrong, I know what's right, I'm not going to listen. What does it look like for you to say, I will not let pride be my God? With your spouse, with your kids, with your coworkers, with whoever it might be in your life. When it comes to your job, maybe you are the most experienced person in the room. Or maybe you have insecurities and you want to blame the company, the organization. What does it look like for you to say, I will not let pride be my guide? When it comes to your finances or your lifestyle and you're tempted to chase and chase and chase because of an insecurity that you have, what does it look like for you to say, I will not let pride be my guide? Maybe for you, it's your perception of God. If you're in here and you're not a follower of Jesus, perhaps for you, you have intellectualized your way around God for your entire life. Maybe you would say, the Bible, that's whatever. I don't think about the Bible. My question for people who always say that is, well, have you read it? And most of the time it's no. We've just intellectualized our way around it. But perhaps for you, it's saying, I will not let pride be my guide is beginning to explore genuinely for you, not based on what someone else said, but for you, who is the person of Jesus? The most powerful and important question you can ask in your life. For me personally, this statement became very real this week. I was driving on Ronald Reagan. I was contemplating life as I normally do on this road. And if you are a northerner like me, you live way out yonder, and you find yourself spending a lot of time on Ronald Reagan, then you understand what I'm talking about. Just sit there and think about like the meaning of life every single day on that road. Maybe it's just me. It sounds like it's just me. But I was driving, and I was actually having a conversation in my head with my wife, Ashley. Because we'd had a week that was just crazy. We were just bumping heads. And in my mind, I was just having this conversation where I was like, I just got to tell her what I'm thinking. She has no idea. You have no idea what's on my plate. You have no idea the pressures I'm feeling this week. And it's just crazy. And what's going on. And I felt myself just like puffing up, listening to the voice of pride. And then I was literally driving to work early in the morning on this message, thinking about this statement, I will not let pride be my guide. Okay, God, what does it look like for me to say that? And in this moment, I thought about it, I said it, and then I recognized my pride. And I recognized, oh, I'm thinking about my world. I'm thinking about how she brings value to me. In this moment, what can I do to bring value to her in her world? And it was so difficult, and I do not get this right most of the time. But in this moment, I'm so glad that the conversation in my head did not come out of my mouth, because my wife takes care of our 1-year-old at home, so much more in our life, and she's pregnant going into the second trimester with our second child. So I'm pretty sure that if this would come out of my mouth, I would have died. No joke. But that's where this became real for me in my life this week. What does it look like for you? The second challenge, the practical step that I want everybody in here to do is a question. It's a question that you actually ask another person, a couple of people in your life who have your best interests at mind. This is a character-building question. It's a question that reveals a lot about who we are, but it reveals a lot about our relationships too. We ask it here at Northpoint and our staff. It helps just kind of stay healthy culturally. But it's a character relationship question, because there is really no greater measure of character than the relationships we have. And here's the really uncomfortable thing. If you're watching online next to someone, or you're sitting next to a spouse or a friend in here, they probably know your character better than you do. They know your strengths and your weaknesses perhaps better than you see those things, because your character is on display to those around you, and the people closest to you in your life can see so much more than you think. So the challenge, the uncomfortable question that I want all of us to ask is this: what's it like on the other side of me? What is it like on the other side of me? What kind of atmosphere do I bring into the room? Is there anything that I am not willing to see that you see? When you ask this question, it is dangerous, because you are opening yourself up for the people closest in your life to point out your character flaws. And that is painful and uncomfortable. Pride does not go down without a fight. But when you ask this, the benefit is that these individuals who love you and care about you can give you gold on what it means to become a person of character. And it can grow your relationships. Here's the thing though. I would say for 90% of us in here in this room, I would probably say, and this is not patronizing, if I were sitting where you're sitting, I would probably feel the same. You will not do this. For 90% of the people in this room, we are not going to ask this question. And that's not a knock on you or anything like that. It's just the fact that we all have two lists in our life. We have an urgent list and we have an important list. And this question is one of those that is on the important list. But as soon as we're done here in just a few moments, the urgent list is going to come calling. You're going to have kids to pick up. You're going to have bills you got to pay. You got to go take care of something at the house. You got to get ready for work tomorrow. The urgent list will come calling if we don't put this kind of question on the urgent list. And so that is my challenge, to take this question and put it on the urgent list, because there is nothing more important for you to work on than your character, because it influences every part of your life. And so when we're done here in just a few moments, my challenge is that you stay for 60 or 90 seconds or whatever it might be and text somebody, hey, let's get coffee. Write down the names of 2 or 3 people that have your best interest in mind. Make a plan on how you are going to ask this question. And I just want to warn you, when you do ask this question, it's going to be completely normal for you to feel like yourself rising up a little bit. Because they're going to start to talk, and everything in you is going to want to go, whoa, no, that you don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I've seen, and the reason I am that way is because of this. And if you just, what I want you to do when you ask this question is to just be quiet. Be quiet, because every moment you defend is a moment you rob your character. Just sit and listen, and even if you disagree, don't say it out loud, because the infusion of health that you put into the relationship and the infusion of character building opportunity that you give yourself is so worth it. In my life, I've found myself on the other side of some incredible people of character where I just sit across from them and I'm just so confused because it is so difficult to offend them. No matter how hard you try, they are just so secure in who they are. One of these people is our lead pastor here, Buck. He didn't tell me to say this. I don't get like extra bonus points for saying this or anything like that. But I sit on the other side of Buck every single week, and we have this thing in our one-on-one meeting called Open Time. And I've been mentored by him for over 10 years, and he's been doing this for 10 years. And every single time he asks this question, what's it like on the other side of me? And he asks questions like, hey, is there anything I'm doing that's breaking trust between us? Or is there anything I'm doing that's damaging our organization or our staff or our church? Would you help me see the things that I can't see? He does this every single week. And I tell him, like he's built enough relational credibility for me to be like, hey, yeah, here's something you did last week, and here's this thing, and I want you to know. And every time, it's almost frustrating, every time he's like, I'm so sorry I did that. You're right, I'm wrong, I'm gonna work on that. I want us to be better as a church, and I want us to be more connected. And when I sit on the other side of people who act like that, every single time I'm just like, how in the world do they do that? Like they are so secure. How are they able to do that? But the common denominator that I've seen is they've spent an incredible amount of time seeing themselves through the lens of who God is, and an incredible amount of time sitting at the cross of Jesus, knowing they are flawed, they are perfectly imperfect, but processing, battling their pride and the other things in their life to the point that they come to the conclusion that they are secure just as they are, that they are a son, they are a daughter of God. That's what I want for your life. That's what I want for my life. But it's going to require us to unfollow pride, to cultivate humility, to see ourselves through the lens of who God is. And my two practical challenges that I want you to do, again, is to say, I will not let pride be my guide. Don't let the voice of pride be the guide in your life. Choose to unfollow and ask 2 to 3 people in your life who have your best interest at mind, what's it like on the other side of me? I hope and I pray that you discover things that make your character better and make your character cause your life to flourish in a way that you didn't think was possible. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for the example of humility that we are given through your Son, Jesus. God, it's such a big thing, a big concept when we think about how grand you are, how great you are, when we see ourselves through the lens of who you are. But in that moment in history, God, you demonstrated what humility looks like. And would you just help us cultivate some aspect of that in our life? God, for those of us in here who are going to ask this question, give us the strength and the courage and the humility to sit and listen. And then would you reveal to us the ways in which we can improve our character as individuals? Lord, we love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks so much for being here. Again, Buck will be back next week for part 3. Can't wait. See you guys.